is a case study in toxic leadership, which I want to expand to talk about toxic leaders and toxic followers that enable them in general. And I don't know whether it belongs on my political channel or my Bible study channel or both channels, because in a way it is applicable to both. There are toxic leaders in churches and there are toxic leaders in government. My case study is going to be from a fellow Francisco Solano Lopez, the president of Paraguay, and he is long deceased. And normally, of course, it's bad form to speak ill of the dead. We don't consider it right to speak ill of the dead unless it's Hitler. It's okay to speak ill of Hitler. For some reason, the prohibitions against don't speak ill of the dead don't apply to him, perhaps because we're horrified by him. He was really a very narcissistic, homicidal person who in the end, he led Germany to absolute ruin. He didn't know when to stop. He couldn't help but keep aggrandizing himself, and he made the world the enemy of Germany when it was all closing in on him. Instead of concluding, I did the wrong thing in leading my nation to war with all these people, he determined that, well, the German people just weren't worthy of me. If they had just followed my leadership more stringently, Germany would be ruling the world, but they just were not good enough for me. That's what he concluded at the end. And you might think, well, that's amazingly hubristic and narcissistic and not owning up kind of thing. And you'd be right, but unbelievably, Hitler wasn't the only one who thought that. I saw a documentary about this German prisoner who spent a year or two in the United States, a year or two in England, and even after the war, they kept him in England working on this farm for a while. And he finally went back to Germany. And the old folks would say, you veterans just didn't fight hard enough for Hitler. If you'd been more dedicated, we could have won this thing and been the greatest nation in the world. And he spent about a month back in Germany. Then he went back to England and decided, you know what, these people, I have nothing in common with them. I'm going to go back and live with the English. And he did for the rest of his life. So you may think that's a one-off, that Hitler is a one-off, and that we use him as an example of an aberration, and we scratch our heads and we wonder, how could the German people, a seemingly educated, sophisticated people, have been that blind? But I'm going to show you he wasn't a one-off. He was something that is more common than we like to admit in this world. They don't get as far as Hitler did. They don't take it to the extremes that Hitler went, because things come into their life to check and balance them. But you give flawed humans unaccountable power, and war is a great excuse for individuals to assume unaccountable power. They go bad. They go bad unless they are moored to reality, moral and spiritual reality, connected to a power greater than themselves in a spiritual way. And I'm talking about Christianity. You know, that's the way I relate it, and I think that's the best defense. That now you say, well, Mark, how come we've got Ukraine and Russia, both Christian populations, and they're warring with each other desperately? It's wrong. That's not the way it should be. I think we have a little bit of toxic leadership going on over there. But I want to talk about Francisco Solano Lopez to give you an idea that even when the stakes seem ridiculously small, even when Hitler is not an aberration, he is what the norm will be if we go too far from the idea that, you know what, there's more to the world than this life. This life is just the test. This life is, we're preparing for who we're going to be in eternity, and it matters. That's what matters. But we're getting away from all that. And when we get away from all that, then people think this life is all there is. They're desperate for worldly greatness. They're desperate to protect whatever goodies or privileges they have. And they're willing to turn to people who promise them to keep them on top, or promise them to vanquish their enemies or whatever. And because they Even with one part of their mind, they believe that the afterlife is more important. In reality, they say this life is all there is, and they're panicked about their own security. So Solano Lopez, let me go through the biography. I think you'll see some commonalities here. He was the son of the president of Paraguay, and he had a privileged life. He was a brigadier general at age 17, and he had many government posts before he himself finally became president. But he had a leg up, you might say, more than one leg up. And Uruguay at that time had more territory than it does now because he lost it in the war. But Brazil and Argentina were the two big powers of the day. Now, when he took over, they had an isolationist foreign policy. That is, we don't want anybody meddling in our business, and we won't meddle in yours. But what he wanted to do was to make Paraguay one of the great powers of South America. And so he formed alliances. He formed an alliance with Uruguay, two nations that most Americans today probably cannot find on a map. The idea, the kind of sacrifice I'm about to describe that people had to make in this war that I'm about to describe just defies reason. It's like, I can see giving my life for the United States because we're the greatest nation on earth, but how could they be convinced to make such sacrifices for Paraguay? Guys, when you're wrapped up in the middle of it, when that's your homeland, this fanaticism scales up nicely. You'll see as we go on. So he formed an alliance. Well, Brazil and Uruguay did not get along. Brazil was a big guy. Uruguay was a little guy. They staged a coup, and they put their own guy in charge of Uruguay. So Lopez asked the Congress to make him a field marshal, basically to give him that unaccountable power that so many crave. And what they say, it's for the good of the nation. That's what they always tell themselves, and that's what they convince people. If you just give me more power, I can fix this. So they did. And he drafted, everybody had compulsory military service, all the males. He expanded the army until his army was bigger than Brazil's army. His navy wasn't. And Paraguay basically was, a river ran right down the middle of it. That was the main way to get up and down the country. But he declared war on Brazil. He attacked Brazil, and at first he had great success. He captured diamond mines. He captured so much gunpowder, enough gunpowder to keep his army supplied. Oh, that's the other thing. He had a lot of troops, but he had ordered weapons from European countries. They hadn't got there yet. He moved soon. He moved before he had his weapons, and the Brazilians used their superior navy just to cut him off from those weapons. So his people had to fight with pitchforks and sickles and stuff like that because they were very quickly running out of guns and ammunition, but not gunpowder because he captured this large depot early in the war. But anyway, they fought the war for a while. And he sent an army. He said, I want to go replace the government of Uruguay back with the people that were friendly to me before because I want to form, they want to be part of my grand coalition. Hey, Argentina, because Argentina was in between these countries. Hey, Argentina, I want to march my army across your country and go fight the Brazilians in Uruguay. And Argentina's like, no, we don't want you to do that. Well, he invaded Argentina. So here is Paraguay. I find it on a map. It used to be bigger, but okay, even if it was twice as big, it's a small country compared to Brazil and Argentina. I think they had him outnumbered something like 22-1. And he led his nation into war outnumbered 22-1. So Hitler was outnumbered too, by the way. Hitler, the Axis powers, they were outnumbered by the people they were warring. So Hitler ordered his people into war with nations more numerous than him. But it was more like 4-1 or 5-1. This was 22-1. So as the war went on, the tide started to turn. Brazil and Argentina, you know what, taking away people's freedom, drafting everybody and building a huge army, it doesn't take a lot of creativity to do that. You have to be willing to impose on your people that much. And since Paraguay was doing it, they did it. Everybody had a big army. So he decided, well, it's time to negotiate. I want to negotiate a peace treaty. He met with them, but guess what they wanted as a condition of peace? As a condition of peace, they wanted him gone. Well, he would rather fight to the last Paraguayan than leave. That is, he would rather fight against nations that outnumber him 22-1, and they were every day increasing. He had already maxed out his population, got his army as big as it could get. They were increasing theirs, and they had access to supplies from the outside world. He did not. The Brazilian Navy had cut him off. He couldn't do anything but lose. And he did, but it was a slow, painful process because people fought. They fought fanatically. His troops fought fanatically. And this went on for years. And till finally, they kicked him out of his own capital. And this whole time, he continued to get more and more paranoid. He was convinced that there was disloyalty. Why? Somewhere deep in his heart, I think some part of him had to know he's leading his nation to ruin. So if he were them, they wouldn't trust him anymore. So he thought they didn't trust him. And he executed his own followers a lot. He executed his brothers. He executed his brothers-in-law. He ordered his mother to be executed. She was flogged. I don't know that the order to execute her was ever carried out. He was accusing all kinds of people of disloyalty and of defeatism. Well, they were being defeated. They were just telling the truth. And finally, it was down to where he had the last couple of hundred guys out in the jungle somewhere, and they decided to make a last stand there. And he somehow got separated from the rest of his troops. The couple of officers with him made an excuse, oh, we'll go get reinforcements, and they just abandoned him. And the Brazilians came up with a half dozen guys, and all right, we got you now. Go ahead and surrender. And, of course, he couldn't. The world wasn't going the way he wanted. He didn't go for that. So he attacked and got killed. And that was the end of him. And peace was immediate. Because what was in the war was, what kept the war going was, he was in charge. He would kill anybody who even thought about ending the war. Paraguay, by some accounts, 90% of its military-age males were lost. I don't think the number was actually that high. But the overall population, only because some of them ran off in the jungle rather than get drafted, but the population of Paraguay dropped by more than half as a result of this war. The misery in that country was immense. All right. Why do I mention this guy? Okay. He did some bad things. He did what Hitler did, but on a much smaller scale. Why are you speaking ill of the dead here, Mark? Because somebody needs to do it. Unlike Hitler, except in a few circles, Solano Lopez is not universally regarded as a toxic leader. He is celebrated in some quarters. He is celebrated in Paraguay. Just like when that soldier went home from Germany, and there were some Germans that said, oh, if only you had fought harder for Hitler. And they look at him like they're crazy. I mean, he saw mass losses and suffering as comrades died, and they fought so hard. There are still people in Paraguay that celebrate him as a national hero. Even some of the military guys in Argentina, I think there's a ship named after him in the Argentinian Navy, even though he was the leader of an opposing country. Why? It's sort of a professional courtesy. Would-be strong men admire guys who did what? Got to the top and fought for their nation. They weren't fighting for the nation. He was fighting for a nation that he was ruling. And like Sun Tzu said, an evil leader will run his nation, destroy his nation, turn it just to rule over the ashes, just to rule over what's left. He was that kind of guy. But yet there are people that celebrate him. And he won't be the only guy like that celebrated. what is the defense against this? This is a part of human nature. Hitler was not a one-off. We may know it's bad if it's Hitler, but you replace it with Lopez, and not everybody down there knows it was bad. Some of them think, well, he was a good leader, just his army was not strong enough to beat the bad guys, and that was his only fault. They think that and honor him as someone who was a staunch defender of their nation. He was a ruiner of the nation. I mean, the country is half the size of what it was because Argentina and Brazil got some of its territory. But again, more than half the population died in the war. So, I guess what I'm saying is we need a defense against that, especially when times are hard as they are now. People are scared, they're mad, and they're going to turn to somebody who they believe is a strong leader who can lead them out of this. And it's about exalting that leader. Well, Christians should have a defense against that. We should already have our leader, not a leader who demands that we die for the nation, conveniently with them at the top, okay? But a leader who has already died for us. And we know what his demands are. We know how his story ends on this earth, although there's going to be a new beginning when he returns. But we don't have to worry about him going paranoid and acting the way Francisco Solano Lopez acted, because the deed's already done and because he showed in his character who he is. He's not the person that would say, every last man fight to the very end to keep me in my position. He willingly gave up his life and said, put away your sword. Don't use swords to defend me. I'm going to go endure this trial. And so a totally opposite thing to glorify. We need to decide what kind of people we want to be. Are we going to be those who glorify the Francisco Solano Lopez's of this world, the would-be strong men who conveniently confuse their own personal glorification with the interests of the nation? Or are we going to uplift the Son of Man? Or are we going to put him on a pedestal and say he is the leader? See, the leaders, the toxic leaders, they twist something that is good in humans. It is good in humans to want to look to a supreme leader, if that supreme leader is the Messiah. But what they do is they want to get in that spot. They want to get in that place in people's spirit that it really is only rightly occupied by Messiah. And when that happens, history shows they can't handle it. They can't handle the authority. The one that handled the authority and never fell out of position with love and sacrifice and service to the people that he leads is Jesus Christ. And so what we need to do is compare our leaders to him. And if we do that, we won't become too wrapped up in them. We'll become, he will just look better and better, and we'll understand the leader that we're supposed to follow more and more. Thank you so much for listening, and may God bless you.